Hoofbeats pounded the ground like thunder itself. Blades crashed against iron. Belief collided with destruction. Throughout the grasslands, standards turned to ash. The heavens appeared ready to collapse. Something that started as distant murmurs from distant land transformed into a force that rattled empires. This wasn't merely a contest for dominance. It was a struggle for humanity's very essence. And when that sunrise ended, an entire region's destiny would be carved in crimson. Have you ever wondered what happens when unstoppable force meets immovable faith? You're about to find out. The opening months of 1241 brought unsettling tales to European shores. Reports drifted westward. Reports describing warriors unlike anything known. A military force that swept across lands like tempests and left devastation in every direction. Initially, skepticism ruled. These accounts seemed impossibly fantastical. Could horseback warriors from distant Asia genuinely endanger kingdoms an ocean away? But when winter's grip loosened and new life emerged, those stories morphed into dire alerts. Throughout Poland's vast territories, entire settlements were disappearing without trace. Krakow had been captured, and survivors who managed to flee described warriors clad in leather and metal, wielding recurved weapons with limitless ammunition. They arrived before dawn, encircled their victims, and departed before dusk, leaving only cinders behind. Their identity remained uncertain. Some labeled them Tatars, while others proclaimed them heaven's punishment. Yet one name echoed through terrified whispers everywhere: Mongols. These fighters bore no resemblance to anything European warfare had prepared for. They operated with mechanical efficiency, moved with supernatural speed, and showed absolute brutality. European cavalrymen advanced in cumbersome steel, but these Eastern warriors fought entirely mounted. Soundless, synchronized, lethal beyond measure. Their commanders had already shattered kingdoms stretching from the Orient to Persia's borders. Now their attention had shifted westward, and Europe had no idea what was coming. Within the Silesian Duchy, urgent dispatches reached Castle Wrocław. Duke Henry the Pious examined intelligence delivered by panic-stricken couriers, metropolises consumed by flames, religious houses destroyed, entire armies obliterated within mere days. Henry possessed neither vast riches nor territorial empire, but his conviction ran deep. And unlike many others, he grasped one terrible reality. This catastrophe wasn't approaching someone else. It was heading straight for them all. He convened his inner circle, religious leaders, nobility, warriors. Tension saturated the chamber, illuminated only by flickering torchlight. Before them sprawled a chart marked with crimson wax indicating fallen territories. "Should we remain idle," Henry declared, "their advance won't terminate at Krakow. They'll reach Silesia, penetrate Bohemia, and consume the entire realm. Our choice is confrontation here, or watching everything vanish." That evening, bells resonated throughout Wrocław's cold atmosphere. Clergy assembled for desperate supplication. Mounted couriers departed into darkness, bearing Henry's desperate plea throughout Christendom. From that moment forward, Europe understood the tempest had materialized, and its initial fury would strike at Legnica. When intelligence of Krakow's annihilation arrived, Wrocław descended into stunned silence. Church bells tolled through cobblestone streets, not celebrating but lamenting. Henry understood warfare had commenced. He assembled his advisors within the fortress's stone chambers. Religious authorities, landowners, and armored nobles surrounded an extended timber table. Smoke and candle fragrance permeated everything. An expansive territorial chart lay exposed, its borders scorched by nearby flames. One after another, voices urged Henry toward western retreat. Others begged for imperial or papal intervention. But Henry simply absorbed their fear. When quiet finally descended, he pressed both palms directly over Silesia's center. "This land is mine by birth," he stated. "I refuse to abandon it. If these territories must perish, then my ashes will join them." Silence answered him. The decision stood final. That same evening, Henry entered the castle chapel alone. Kneeling before the sacred crucifix, cold stone pressing his knees, candlelight dancing across his armor, he prayed not for triumph but for strength, because somewhere deep within he recognized what approached. At daybreak, messengers scattered in all directions, carrying sealed correspondence marked with crimson crosses. Henry's message carried brutal clarity. The eastern lands have awakened. United we survive. Divided we perish one by one. Days stretched into weeks, and gradually from across Christian territories, warriors began answering. From Bohemia, the White Lion standards appeared on distant horizons. From Moravia and Germanic lands, armored cavalry and hired swords traveled through dense forests. From northern reaches came the Teutonic Order, their pale mantles bearing obsidian crosses, faces concealed behind frigid steel. Common farmers and craftsmen joined them, carrying spears forged from farming tools and battle axes from their workshops. They weren't trained soldiers, but they recognized the alternative. By April's arrival, Silesian plains buzzed with activity. Encampments extended for miles across open fields. Polish, Bohemian, and Holy Cross banners rippled beneath overcast spring skies. The resonance of metal, thundering hooves, and echoing prayers merged into singular rhythm. Europe was mobilizing. One morning, Henry rode among his assembled forces, rain-soaked earth beneath them. Mud caked the boots of soldiers kneeling in devotion. Father Bernard, Bishop of Wrocław, positioned himself before a wooden altar, raising a golden crucifix skyward above the masses. Thousands bowed their heads. His voice carried across the vast expanse. Your presence here isn't for wealth or recognition. You stand for your eternal souls and for every Christian generation yet unborn. The responding roar shook the ground itself. Some elevated their weapons, others shed tears. The atmosphere trembled with that strange fusion of terror and devotion. Henry dismounted and knelt among them. In that singular instant, the Duke and the humblest peasant became identical, men aware they might never witness another dawn. When the ceremony concluded, Henry rose and surveyed the ocean of armor and standards before him. He saw not strangers, but brotherhood forged through faith, not bloodline. Here we make our final stand, he whispered, not for thrones or territories, but for the world our children inherit. That evening, rainfall ceased. Fires blazed throughout the encampment like fallen stars. Warriors sharpened steel and murmured prayers. Others sat silently, composing final letters to families they'd never embrace again. Henry walked between the tents, his armor reflecting firelight. He paused beside his longtime companion, Sir Jaroslav, who sat polishing his blade by the flames. "Can we actually halt them?" Jaroslav asked quietly. Henry observed sparks ascending into darkness. "No," he admitted after lengthy pause, "but we can demonstrate that Europe refuses to bow." Far beyond the camp, throughout the eastern plains' darkness, Mongol scouts were already observing. The Tempest had located its next target, and Europe's battle was about to commence. While Europe offered prayers for salvation, the Mongols were already advancing. They emerged from eastern territories, from Ruthenia's frozen steppes, crossing waterways and woodlands, an endless tide. For them, distance held no meaning. Each sunrise merely signaled another day's march. They carried no gilded or silk standards. Their flags were obsidian, stitched with enemy horsehair. At their vanguard rode the generals, Baydar, Orda, and Kadin, veterans of campaigns that had demolished empires. Behind them, 10,000 riders moved as singular entity. Every warrior understood his position, every mount trained to obey the faintest signal. They spoke sparingly. They required no inspirational speeches or battle hymns. Their discipline was their religion, their objective, absolute conquest. To the Mongols, warfare wasn't chaos. It was calculated science. Every maneuver, every charge, every retreat precisely measured. They studied landscapes, counted ammunition, calculated wind patterns. Before confronting any opponent, they'd already determined his defeat. Scouts ranged far ahead of the primary force, monitoring roads, rivers, and fortifications from safe distances. When they detected resistance, they marked it, waited, and summoned destruction. Their weapons appeared simple, but in their hands flawless. The composite bow, wood, horn, and sinew bound through adhesive and patience. It could penetrate armor at 200 paces. Their arrows arced through atmosphere like steel rainfall. When attacking, they never charged directly. They surrounded. They feigned withdrawal, luring enemies forward. And when the trap closed, no escape existed. Westward, European forces were constructed on valor and dignity. The Mongols fought with something colder, mathematical precision. They wasted no motion, sought no glory. For them, victory was simply another completed task. Entering Poland, they discovered cities unprepared. Fortifications that had endured centuries crumbled within hours. Defenders anticipated sieges, but the Mongols didn't siege. They encircled, incinerated, and advanced. Within 14 days, they'd carved through half the nation. Krakow burned, Sandomierz fell, and every survivor fleeing westward carried identical testimony. They arrive like smoke, and when the smoke dissipates, nothing survives. At their encampments, Mongols rested in silence. Their shelters were modest and plain. No extravagance, no decoration. They consumed food from iron vessels, horses tethered nearby, weapons perpetually within reach. Each evening, captains gathered around singular fires. They conversed softly in their native tongue, accounting supplies, planning routes, reading stars for navigation. Baydar, the eldest, spoke minimally. He'd witnessed excessive warfare to value speeches. He believed terror was the keenest weapon. "We'll allow them to assemble," he stated. "Let them believe they're prepared. Then we strike once and conclude it." Nobody questioned him. They'd followed him for years across deserts and frozen wastes. They trusted his judgment beyond their own survival. At dawn, encampments vanished. Shelters dismantled, ashes buried, footprints erased. When sunrise arrived, the steppe appeared untouched, as though no army had existed there. But they were coming. The riders crossed rivers, forests, and mountain passes. Each mile brought them closer to Silesia, closer to Henry's gathering army at Legnica. The Mongols perceived Europe as neither sacred nor hallowed. For them, it was simply another territory to subjugate. Yet even they sensed something different here. The forests were darker, the atmosphere colder. The faces of captured villagers held not only terror but conviction. Some whispered these people fought for their deity, others laughed. "All men pray before death," one said. Yet in night's stillness, even battle-hardened warriors felt the journey's weight. They'd crossed thousands of miles, lost companions, horses, brothers. But the Great Khan's command was absolute. The campaign wouldn't cease until the West was shattered. By early April, scouts returned. They'd located it, a massive army assembling near Legnica. Thousands of knights, cross-bearing banners, their armor gleaming like mirrors under sunlight. Baydar stood over the dirt-carved map. He traced a line with his gloved finger, then lifted his gaze toward his men. "They believe their God will rescue them," he said. "Let him attempt it." That evening, Mongol drums began their rhythm. The eastern storm was prepared, and with daybreak, Europe would finally confront it face to face. ACT 5, The Fog of War. April 9, 1241 commenced in absolute silence. No anthems, no horns, only fog. Dense and frigid, it swept across the plains near Legnica, consuming fields, rivers, distant forests. Visibility extended barely beyond a few steps. Even horses snorted anxiously, their breath forming white clouds. Duke Henry the Pious stood atop a modest elevation, his armor weighted with moisture, his face pallid yet composed. Before him, tens of thousands awaited. Knights from Poland, Bohemia, Germany, and the Teutonic Order. They'd prayed throughout the night. Now they stood prepared, crosses painted on shields, banners dripping through mist like phantoms. Across the battlefield, invisible, the Mongols were already mobilizing. Their scouts moved like specters through fog, counting banners, measuring wind. Commander Baydar observed from a distant ridge. He said nothing, merely raised a hand. A single flag waved, the signal, the trap was set. Behind him, hoofbeats began building, soft initially, then like thunder. Thousands of riders moved as one, each man knowing his role. They didn't charge straight ahead. They moved in waves, sliding through mist like tightening steel. Henry couldn't see them, but he could hear. The sound arrived first. The rhythmic pounding of hooves, the hissing of wind-cut arrows, the eerie war cries in incomprehensible language. The first wave struck the front lines. Arrows tore through armor. Men collapsed before even seeing their attackers. "Hold the line," Henry shouted. Knights lowered their lances. The fog around them exploded into chaos. Horsemen colliding, swords flashing, the clash of steel swallowed by screams. But the Mongols didn't remain to fight. They struck, then vanished back into the mist. It was as if the fog itself was killing them. Confusion spread through Christian ranks. Nobody could determine enemy position. Some believed the Mongols had fled, others suspected sorcery. Then the second wave came, this time from the flanks. Arrows rained from both sides. Men turned in panic, their formation disintegrating. Henry rode forward through the chaos. His cloak was torn, his horse slick with mud and blood. He grabbed a fallen banner and raised it high. "For God and for Poland," he cried. The men rallied momentarily, charging blindly into the fog. They met nothing, only empty air. Then the Mongols reappeared, circling them, cutting off escape. Far to the rear, the Teutonic Knights attempted to hold formation. Their black crosses gleamed faintly in the mist. They fought in silence, their shields locked, their faith unbroken. But even they were surrounded. The Mongols fired from every direction, then feigned retreat once more, drawing the Christians farther from their lines. Baydar observed from the ridge. Everything was unfolding as calculated. He turned to his standard bearer and nodded. The drums began to beat. A third wave, the heavy cavalry, advanced. The fog seemed to come alive with motion. Horses burst from the white haze, crashing into the scattered European knights. The sound was deafening. Metal against metal, the earth shaking beneath thousands of hooves. Henry's army fought bravely, but their courage couldn't stop the confusion. The battlefield had transformed into a maze of smoke, blood, and screams. Nobody could see the commander. Nobody knew who was winning. By noon, the sun attempted to pierce the fog, but only revealed the horror beneath. Bodies lay in heaps. Horses screamed and stumbled through mud slick with blood. The air was thick with the smell of iron and fire. Henry found himself surrounded. He swung his sword until his arm went numb. Everywhere he turned, more enemies, but still he refused to yield. "Stand with me," he shouted, "for Christendom." Those around him formed a small circle. They fought like men who knew death was watching. Each blow slower than the last, each breath heavier. Across the ridge, Baydar observed through the haze. He gave the final command. The signal arrow streaked into the air. Green feathers, the mark of death. All at once the Mongols closed in from every side. The trap snapped shut. The fog, the fire, the screams became one. By the time the sound faded, the field of Legnica was silent, and the banner of the cross had disappeared into the mist. By midday, the fog had begun lifting, but it didn't bring clarity, only horror. The field of Legnica was unrecognizable. What had been grass and soil that morning was now mud and blood. The air reeked of iron and smoke. Broken lances jutted from the ground like a forest of thorns. Bodies lay tangled with shattered horses. Some still clutched their swords. Others reached toward the sky as if still praying for deliverance. From the high ridge, Badar watched in silence. His face betrayed no emotion. For him, this wasn't victory. It was simply the conclusion of another calculation. "Now," he said quietly, "close the jaws." At his command, the Mongol riders moved. Thousands of hooves thundered across the plain from every direction, east, west, north, and south. They converged on the last surviving pockets of resistance. The trap was complete. The Christian army, once proud and united, was now split into scattered fragments, small islands of men drowning in a sea of enemies. The Teutonic knights formed a circle of shields, their black crosses smeared with blood and dust. They fought silently, their discipline unbroken even in death. But wave after wave crashed against them. Arrows rained from above. Axes tore through armor, and still they did not retreat. Henry saw the carnage from the center of the field. He could barely recognize his own army. The fog that had hidden the enemy now revealed a nightmare. He rode to what was left of his knights, a few dozen men, exhausted, bleeding, but still alive. "With me," he shouted, "we fight to the end." They lowered their visors, tightened their grips, and followed him into the storm. The ground shook beneath them. They crashed into a wall of Mongol riders. Steel met steel, men screamed, horses fell. And for a moment, just a moment, the Mongol line bent, but then it closed again. From the ridge, Orda, Badar's brother, signaled to his archers. Thousands of bows rose as one. The sky darkened. Arrows filled the air like a storm cloud. When they fell, they did not miss. Henry's banner disappeared. The cross, the lion, the eagle, all swallowed by shadow. When the dust settled, the Mongols advanced once more. They rode among the fallen, killing anyone who still moved. Their discipline was absolute, their mercy non-existent. In the chaos, Henry's horse was struck. The beast reared, throwing him to the ground. He rolled, mud and blood covering his face. When he stood, his sword was gone. Around him, the last of his men were dying. Sir Jaroslav, his oldest friend, took an arrow to the chest and fell without a sound. Henry grabbed a broken spear. He tore off his helmet, his hair dark with sweat and blood. "Come then," he roared. "You'll take no king while he still stands." He fought like a man possessed, striking, kicking, driving back whoever came near. But there were too many. A sword cut through his leg. Another slammed into his shoulder. He dropped to one knee. A Mongol officer approached, his armor black, his face hidden behind a mask of bone. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Henry raised his head, blood on his lips, and whispered, "Christ have mercy." The sword came down, and the Duke of Poland was no more. The Mongols stripped the field in silence. They took no prisoners. They collected the severed heads of the fallen leaders, Henry's among them, and placed them in sacks for the march ahead. When the day ended, Legnica was a wasteland. Crows gathered over the corpses. Fires burned where once there had been prayer. That night, Badar's army camped on the hill above the battlefield. The generals met by a small fire, their faces lit by the red glow. "It is done," Orda said. "The West is broken." Badar shook his head. "No," he said quietly, "not yet. There are still others who believe their God will save them." He turned his eyes toward the west, toward the heart of Europe, toward Hungary, where another army was waiting. The drums began to beat again, slow and steady. And under the cold night sky, the riders of the steppe prepared to move once more. When the sun set over Legnica, the battlefield was quiet. The fog had lifted, but it revealed only ruin. Broken armor glinted in the dying light. Fires still burned where tents once stood. The cries of the wounded faded into silence. Among the fallen lay Henry the Pious, his body stripped of armor, his head taken as a trophy. No one who stood beside him that day survived. For hours, the Mongols moved through the field, finishing what the battle had begun. They piled the dead, burned what could not be taken, and erased every trace of the army that had stood against them. When news reached Rocklaw, the bells did not ring. There was no priest, no sermon, no prayer, only weeping. The city gates were closed, its people hiding in fear, expecting the Mongols to come at any moment. But the riders did not come. They gathered their spoils and turned south toward Hungary, leaving behind a land of ashes and ghosts. Weeks later, a group of monks crept onto the battlefield. They searched among the bodies for their duke. It was said they found him only by a mark on his leg, a scar he had carried since childhood. They wrapped him in linen and carried him home in silence. No banners, no procession, only a man who had stood when others fled. In the months that followed, Europe trembled. Kings built new fortresses. Priests called for holy war. But fear lingered everywhere, a shadow that stretched across the continent. The Mongols had proved that no wall, no faith, no army was beyond their reach. And yet in death, Henry's stand became something more. For though he lost his life, his courage gave Europe time. Time to prepare, time to unite, time to believe that the storm could still be stopped. In the chronicles that came after, they called him the pious, the faithful duke who fought when others ran. And on the fields of Legnica, where the earth still bears the scars of that day, the wind still whispers his name. Alternative opening hook. What would you do if an unstoppable force from the other side of the world was coming for everything you loved? Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you stand and face the storm, knowing you couldn't win? One man made that choice in 1241, and his answer changed Europe forever. Alternative ending for stronger call to action. Henry the Pious never won his battle, but he didn't need to. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't measured in triumph, but in the courage to stand when standing seems impossible. The question is, what would you have done in his place? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more untold stories from history's darkest hours, subscribe, because this is only the beginning.